Every angler I've ever met, from the beginners to the experts, has some kind of question they'd like answered. Whether it's learning about the best way to fight and land trout in a river, or whether that far-flung lake actually has any fish in it, you never run out of things to wonder about in this sport. And the great thing about asking questions and actively learning is that you never know when you're going to run into something, some little nugget of wisdom that'll completely change the way you approach fly fishing. Well, this week's episode of Untangled might just be that moment for you. This week's show is all Q&A, from barbless hooks and fixing broken fly rods to the value of multi-fly rigs. Chances are you're about to learn something that'll make a difference on the water. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant. We get so many questions into the show every single week, and I love it. Please keep them coming. But it's almost impossible, or it is impossible, actually, to keep up on all of them, because if I was going to answer every single question that I got from y'all, I'd have to do like 3 or 4 shows a week. And at that point, when do I get to go fishing? So as much as I'd love to do that, I got to spend some time on the water. So I hope that this can be a regular type of episode where I just go through as many questions and try and answer a broad variety of the things that y'all are wanting to learn about. So if you enjoy what we do today, if you like this format where it's just all Q&A, definitely drop a comment and let me know if you enjoy it. If you didn't enjoy it, please let me know that as well. That's valuable feedback, because this show, I say it just about every week, the show is for you guys. That's why I ask for your questions all the time, because this is run off of what's going to help y'all become better anglers and what's going to help you live real life. That's the whole goal of what we do here. So if it's doing that, and if you really love this format, let me know. We can definitely plan more of these shows out in the future. And as always, if you have a fly fishing question that you would like answered, because seriously, the show runs on your questions. Without them, we can't do the show. So keep sending them in. Even if I haven't gotten to yours yet, that doesn't mean I won't get to it. Just keep sending them in. There's a link to send those in, though, down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you are watching the video podcast. And this week's first question comes to us from Joseph from Washington, writes in and says, "First, I love the show. Thank you for the pride you put into your craft. As you stated in an episode, a fish counts when you get it in the net. You spend so much time on how to catch fish, but almost no time on how to net fish. An episode and video would be appreciated. Tight lines, live real life." Joseph, thank you. We appreciate the kind words. And the fact that you're a regular listener. I really appreciate that. So let's go ahead and walk you through how you should set the hook, fight, and net a fish on the river. This is a very valuable skill. You're right. I probably don't talk about it often enough. It's one of those things you think, especially when I used to guide, the hardest part for me from a guide's perspective was getting the client to actually hook into the fish, because you've got so much that's got to go right. You need the drift to be okay. You need them to not have too much slack in their line, and then they've got to set that hook. And that is a lot more work it was for me as a guide than just netting the fish. I would just kind of coach them, like, bring it over here, and then I'd do most of the netting. That's one of your jobs as the guide. But when you're on your own, you don't have the guide to do that. So this is one of those things that I just kind of I skip over myself sometimes in remembering, oh yeah, this is a skill that we need to hit more often. Anyways, first thing is first here, though. Your hook set is going to be the most important part of this process, because if your hook set's not dialed in, you're going to miss fish. And then what's the point of learning how to net them if you can't hook them, right? So unless you're fishing with streamers, you're going to use what we call a trout set. The trout set is where you firmly and quickly lift the rod with the tip pointing up in the air while keeping your fly line tight. I like to always have my fly line held against the cork grip of my rod with one of my fingers, and then all of the slack line is going to be below the reel. So I make my cast, it's upstream. Let's say I'm fishing a dry fly. And as the current brings that back towards me, I'm stripping that slack line in, and all of that slack line is going to be below the reel. There's not going to be any slack between my hand and the fly. That's all going to be relatively slack free. There'll be a little bit because it's drifting on the water, right? You've got some S curves in the line. It doesn't land straight. It's not like super tight, but all that extra slack line that I'm bringing in is below the reel. And then if you watch any of our videos where we're out, any of our how we fish videos that we've been putting out, you'll see I've always got the fly line held against the cork, usually with my middle finger or my pointer finger in my rod hand. That's because when a fish takes that dry fly, all my slack line's already down below the reel. There's not very much slack between me and the fish. So as soon as that fish eats, I can just clamp that line tight against the cork, lift with the rod, and drive that hook point home. And that's your trout set. It is keeping the line tight and then lifting and putting pressure to drive the hook point home. And usually it's going to be that straight up lift. Sometimes you might lift to one side or to the other, just depending on whether or not you're, there's like if there's a tree directly above you, you're not going to lift straight up because you're going to bang your rod into the branches. You might set to the side in that instance. If you're not fishing directly upstream, if you're casting at like a 45-degree angle, letting it drift down in front of you and drift a little bit downstream of you, then if the fish eats, you're going to set in the direction that the water is flowing to help use the current to set that hook. So it's not always a straight up in the air, but that is, it might be to the side a little bit, but it's still going to be up. You're going to be moving in that up, in that up direction. And then an important thing to remember is that it's a firm, but it's a quick lift of the rod. You're not going all Bill Dance here. Okay, and there's no Bassmaster Classic that you're trying to qualify for. It's just a firm but quick lift of the rod. Don't get your whole body into it because you'll yank the fly out of the fish's mouth. All right, and this is something that'll come with practice. The more you do it, you'll get a feel for it. But keep those tips in mind. Now, once you've set the hook, you've got to keep tension on the line until you are ready to net the fish. Now, you can accomplish this by stripping line in with your other hand. So the hand that's not holding the rod, you can strip the line into you. Or if the fish is big enough, or if it's run enough, or if you didn't have very much slack, you can just go ahead and reel your slack in. You can put the fish on the reel, and then you can use the reel to keep tension on the fish as you bring it towards you. But if you get any slack in your line at all during this fighting process, that's when it's very likely the fish is going to spit the hook, because as soon as tension comes off of it, that hook can slide out like a butter. Okay. It is a balancing act of keeping tension on the line, but not pulling so hard that you're going to snap your tippet and your leader. This is one of those things that the more you do it, the better feel you're going to develop for it. The thing that I've found helped me and that has helped a lot of other anglers, because I spent a lot of time, even though I've been fly fishing for forever, I spent a lot of time in my younger days jig fishing with spinning rods. And when I went to the fly exclusively, I would run into that habit of, with a spinning rod, you just kind of horse the fish in because you've got a stiff rod, you've got, you've got, relatively strong line. You can kind of yank on the fish a little bit more with those spinning rods. And I just tried to do that with fly rod, and I kept breaking tippet, kept breaking lines off, breaking flies off. And that's because I was trying to fight and horse the fish in. What you're really trying to do is just guide the fish towards the net. You're trying to get the fish to swim towards you, swim towards where the net is. And if you think of it in that way, where you're guiding the fish to the net, you're not fighting it to the net, I've found just that little mindset shift can help people not horse it in too much and break the fish off. So once you have the fish close to you, that's when, and this can be a little bit of a tango that you dance out on the river out there. and more than once I've fallen in while I've been trying to do this, but you're going to reach behind you wherever your net is hanging. I like to hang my net off my back on a retractor, the one that we have here at VFC. I like the magnetic ones. It just keeps it secure. But I'll reach behind me. I'll grab my net with my free hand. It's going to be my left because I cast with my right. So my rod's always my right hand. Reach behind me with my left, grab the net, and then I'm going to lift the rod nice and high. Because what I'm trying to do at this point is want the fish's head up. Because if you get their head up, it's a lot easier to control where they're going, and then you can just slip the net right underneath them. If you try to jab that net into the water when their head's still down and they can see and they have a lot of control, they're going to run and escape that net almost every time. And then, especially with the big fish, if you hit that fish with the net, if you go in and you hit the line or you hit the fish and you introduce just a little bit of slack at that last moment, that's when the hook can pop free and your trophy brown trout swims away laughing at you like, yeah, I got you today, buddy. And you don't want that. You don't want to be laughed at by fish. It's not fun. I've been there. Many times I've been there. You don't want to experience it. So get the fish's head up and then just slide the net underneath it, let go of the tension, and boom, that fish is in the net. And you have just got yourself a trout. So you deserve a round of applause and your drink of choice. For me, cracking open another Diet Coke to celebrate that fish. So that's the process. That's what you've got to do to fight and to net the fish. And we actually have an entire episode of our beginning fly fishing masterclass on this exact topic. So I'll go ahead and link that episode in the show notes for you or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast.
Hey there, it's Alex. You ever find yourself standing in the river, staring at your open fly box, wondering, what the heck do I tie on? Yeah, it happens to all of us, especially if you're not quite sure what bugs are active. That's why we've put together our year-round hatch chart. It breaks down the major hatches that happen across the US so you can understand what's happening in your neck of the woods and pick the right fly with confidence. Snag a free copy by scanning the QR code on the screen or hit the link in the show notes. All right, back to Untangled.
Ty from New York City has our next question, writes in and says, "Hi, Spencer. I've just purchased a new rod specifically for streamers and wanted some info on different line types. What's the difference between sinking, sink tip, and intermediate lines? Oh, and then you have your poly leaders. Any insight on what to use on what water types? Up to now, I was just using your previous podcast advice and tying some heavy fluoro to my floating line. It works great and I love the simplicity. However, it would be nice to have another line option as I move from smaller rivers to the big boys and maybe some still water." Ty, thanks for the question. Appreciate it. Sinking fly lines are lines where the entire line is designed to sink. So the coating on it, instead of floating, it's very dense. In fact, I think they use a tungsten-based powder on a lot of these. And they're designed to sink, especially those full sink lines are designed to sink relatively quickly. You want them to get down to where they're going pretty quick. The full sink lines mostly get used on lakes, on still water environments. So that's where you're going to see those get the most use. Now, sink tip lines are ones where just the tip section, usually the first 15 to 20 feet of the line, is made to sink. And then the rest of it is normal floating line. So there'll be a transition from the sinking to the floating line. Excuse me. These are really popular for fishing streamers and rivers when you need your fly to sink and to get down quickly, but you don't need it to sink much more than 6-7 feet. Usually, that's about the depth you'll be fishing a lot of streamers and rivers. And then intermediate lines, they are built to sink at a slower rate, like 1 to about 1.25 inches per second. And they're designed to fish in a lot shallower water. So maybe it's only 2 or 3 feet deep or higher in the water column. You want to keep that streamer up in the first foot or so of water. Or if it's really shallow, you want to keep it just barely above the bottom. And you're going to see a lot of intermediate lines used in saltwater fishing, where you want to sink it down, but you want it just skimming the bottom. So those are your different lines. Now, polyleaders. Polyleader is actually a brand name from Airflow fly lines. They make them. Rio makes this same thing as well. They call it a VersaLeader. All it is a short piece of fly line that is designed to sink at a certain rate from like 1 inch to 7 inches per second. And you use a loop-to-loop connection on the end of your floating line. And that's why they kind of get that leader name, because you tie it on like your leader. And they're basically a way to customize your own sink tip fly line. You'll still need to attach some sort of fluorocarbon or a little bit of leader to the end of this poly leader, because again, it's all fly line. But if you just go with that standard advice tie that I gave you, where for streamers, I just like a 5-foot section of 8 or 10 pound fluorocarbon, no taper to it. Those cast very well, and it just helps get your fly down to where it needs to be with that fluoro. That's how you'd rig up and use a poly leader. So if you're going to be fishing streamers on rivers, I would pick up a sink tip line. That's what I use. I've got 2 or 3 sink tip lines. I like the ones that sink at about 3 to 4 inches per second. I don't want them super aggressive, because that's quick enough in my experience. It'll sink fairly well in fast water, but it's not so heavy that they sink like a rock and then they get hung up on the bottom and you're just dragging weeds the whole time. You're not catching any fish. But if you're consistently fishing deep in lakes, a full sink line is going to be your best option. That's what I'd recommend there. I don't really use poly leaders at all, because I've got those sink tip lines and I've got them on extra spools and extra reels. I've got too many reels. I've got to go through this. There's 2 of them right here if you're watching the video podcast, and then there's literally behind where I have the camera set up, there's literally a dozen just sitting there, and I got to go through and clean it out. It's ridiculous. You accumulate so much stuff doing fly fishing that when you actually pile all your gear into one place, you're going to look at it and think, really? All of that stuff? It just kind of blows my mind every time I look at it. But anyways, I don't really use poly leaders because I've got sink tip lines on other reels. But if you don't want to invest in another reel or another spool for your reel, yeah, poly leaders are a great option because they're basically a DIY sink tip fly line. So hopefully that answers your question, Ty. Thank you so much for sending it in. Scott from Colorado's got our next question. Writes in and says, I haven't noticed that you both seem to mention that you use barbless hooks. As a beginner, would you recommend that we use them as well, or will we lose more fish? I assume your reason is that it is better for the fish and safer for the angler. Do you support pinching barbed hooks, and can you share best practices? Scott, you are completely right. Alex, he runs all of VFC media with me. So all of our videos and stuff, we tag team it. That's what we do. But yeah, Alex and I love barbless hooks. That is what I think in the last 2 or 3 years, both of us have just completely made the shift over. I think I started fishing barbless a little bit before I started working for VFC, but really it just made that shift over not too long ago. And yeah, I 100% recommend you use barbless hooks or pinch the barb on your hooks. And the vast majority of flies sold come with a barb on the hook. It's just how a lot of fly hooks are made. Some companies are making more and more barbless hooks, but they're just still not as popular. I think it's hard to get over the mental block of selling a barbless hook to somebody who's used to fishing with a barbed hook. And I think folks might look at that and see it as less valuable, less of a good option for a variety of reasons. And they're not wrong per se, but you'll probably end up having to pinch the barbs on a lot of the hooks that you end up buying. So to directly answer that, yeah, I 100% support pinching barbs. All of our flies at VFC, I pinch the barbs on them as soon as I get them out of the package and into my fly box. Boom, barbs get pinched. But in my experience, once you pinch that barb, it really does function almost exactly like a barbless hook. There's just going to be this little nub left over from where that barb has been pinched, and I just use my forceps for it to pinch it down. But there's going to be just a little bit of a bump left over after you pinch it, and that little bump is just enough that when you tie a tandem nymph rig, or if you're tying a dry dropper rig off the bend of the hook, it's going to stop your tippet from sliding completely off the point of the hook. Because I know that's an issue and a worry some folks have with true barbless hooks, is they worry that their leader or tippet's going to slide off of it when they build multi-fly rigs. I don't have that problem with true barbless hooks very often. I think I can count on one hand how many times it's happened to me. But I know it happens to a lot of other folks. So if you worry about things sliding off, just pinch the barb down. You don't have to worry about that at all, because they'll stay on those barbed hooks even once the barb has been pinched down. Now, I made that switch to barbless a few years ago, like I said. And when I did lose quite a few more fish at the very beginning. But that's because I'd gotten lazy in my fish fighting. Because with barbed hooks, if you don't keep perfect tension on your fly at all times, that barb can keep the fly in the fish. It won't always pop right out. But with barbless hooks, if you let off that tension for even just a second, they're going to slide out a lot easier. There's nothing to stop it from coming out. So I think for beginners, barbless hooks, I think using barbless hooks is actually going to be better, because it's going to teach you very good habits right out of the gate. It's going to drive home those habits. Because if you're hooking into the fish and they're spitting the hook very quickly, it's going to tell you, okay, there's not enough tension on my line. There is too much slack. It's going to give you that immediate feedback, and you won't develop bad habits like I did. So I think a lot of beginners would benefit from it. That's just my 2 cents. But I love barbless hooks because they are so much easier to get out of the fish than barbed hooks. And I swear, it's like 75% of the time, the barbless hooks, whether it's been pinched down or actual barbless, once I get that fish in the net and there's no more tension on my flies, those hooks pop out of the fish's mouth like 75% of the time. It's crazy. I hardly even have to get the flies out of the fish anymore. They just slide out on their own. And it's fantastic because that's less time handling the fish. You're not down there jamming your fingers in its mouth, trying to yank this fly out without killing it. And, think of how much we all just adore going to the dentist. They're poking around in our mouth, and we're paying them for that crap, by the way. The fish ain't paying us. They don't like that. They don't like going to the dentist like that. So, and kidding aside, the less you handle the fish, the less they're out of the water, the less you mess with them, the better chance they have of surviving as we're practicing catch and release. And we know that taking care of the fish is paramount. We've got to do that. We've got to take care of these critters and do all we can to make sure that they've got a great chance to survive after we release them. And barbless hook's just part of that. It reduces handling time significantly, and the barbless hooks don't damage the fish near as much because they're not going to rip chunks of their face off. They really are just a great all-around option, and the learning curve might be a little steep sometimes, but I think the lessons you learn and the habits you build with them are 100% worth using barbless hooks for. So thank you for sending that question on in. Lex from Montana has our next question, writes in and says, I fish the Gallatin near Bozeman year-round pretty consistently. How would you go about getting to fish and catching fish when the river is packed? Well, Lex, you are definitely going to get a lot of practice with crowds up there. That is a very crowded area to be fly fishing in. You got a couple options. The first is you can go explore some of the lesser popular parts of the river, or you can go look at the places that are a little bit further from the parking areas and pullouts along the canyon road there on the Gallatin. And this is going to hold true for every crowded river, not just the Gallatin. Every crowded river is going to follow this same playbook. if you're willing to walk half mile to a mile, maybe a little bit more from a lot of parking areas, chances are you're going to find water that you can fish. You might not have it to yourself, especially on a place like the Gallatin, but you'll at least be able to get into a section of water you can fish. So if you're willing to hoof it a little bit and put some distance between you and the parking area, that's one option you've got. Another option is to go ahead and look for pocket water. This is places where the water is flowing around a lot of obstacles like rocks, boulders, and logs, and there's big pockets or little pockets of calm water behind all those obstructions. And you can fish through the pocket water, the rapidy sections of the river, because a lot of anglers overlook pocket water for whatever reason. And I'll even see a lot of folks that just skip it entirely. They want to fish the riffles, runs, pools, and then they skip the pocket water completely. So it can be a really fun way to fish, especially on crowded rivers. A lot of folks might just skip that. They're wanting to fish, especially you go to a place like the Gallatin. They're wanting to fish dry flies in this beautiful riffle or in this pool or in this run, and they've got this picture in their head of what they want it to look like, and often that's not pocket water. And that's fine. I'm not dogging on anybody. Just there's a lot of reasons why folks will skip over it. But you can go fish that stuff, and you can fish in between one pool and another, and end up doing pretty well for yourself in that pocket water. And we've actually got an entire video on fishing pocket water. I'll link that in the show notes over on the screen here for you if you want to get a better idea of what it looks like and how to approach that kind of water. But the last thing I want to mention is when you're on these crowded rivers, stream etiquette is paramount. Just make sure that you're giving other anglers as much room as you'd like. Now, that's not, let's say as much room as you'd like, and then I'm the guy that wants the whole river to myself. So it's not always possible, but don't be fishing right on top of somebody. Alex and I were out a few months ago on a river that's really popular, and literally Alex was fishing a pool, not a very big pool at all, and he was in the middle of the pool fishing the right side, and he was just about to start to fish the left, and someone comes down two anglers actually come down the trail and get in on the left and start casting right on top of where Alex was fishing. Just acted like he wasn't there, and they could see him. It was very obvious that they knew what they were doing. They were just being jerks. Don't be those guys. Nobody likes those guys. Everybody wants to punch those guys in the face. All right, because it's just not courteous. Okay, give folks room. Give folks a little bit of space. Don't try to fish the same hole or run that someone else is fishing. Give them a little bit of room. And then the flip side of that too is don't be the person that camps in one spot all day, especially on these more popular rivers. A lot of the holes are very well known. You get your chance to fish it, go fish it hard, fish it well. And then once you're done, move on. Let somebody else have that opportunity to fish it. That's kind of the unwritten contract that you sign when you're going to these really famous rivers is we're all going to share. We're all going to get a chance to fish this stuff. And then if you're ever unsure, if you're too close to somebody, if you're really brand new to this and you don't know like, well, how much room do I want? Just go ask, because 90% of the time when you ask, all the other anglers are going to be stoked because a lot of folks just don't ask. So if you ask and say, hey, I'd like to go fish, if there's an angler in a riffle and there's a pool 75 yards upstream of him and there's another angler or whatever, and you say, hey, I'd like to go fish this spot. Is that too close? Are you okay with that? Were you working to that? If you just ask, 90% of the time, especially on a river like the Gallatin, they're going to say, oh yeah, go ahead. Because we get it. We understand that we've got to share a lot of water. So they're a lot more amenable, especially on these kinds of rivers, to sharing water, being a little bit closer. But a little conversation goes a long way in setting up a really good day on the water. So don't be afraid to ask people. There's going to be jerks. There's going to be people who yell. That's just the nature of the world, unfortunately. But the vast majority of folks that I run into are really nice when you talk to them about it, really easy to work with. So just have some communication, give each other room, and you'll be in great shape. So thanks for sending that question on in. Peter from England has our next question, writes in and says, I was just wondering if everything in the video is going to be applied in the UK. I'm gathering it can. But I love your videos. You guys have really gotten me back on the water. Just still waters at the moment. Haven't been to a river yet. Peter, yes, it can be, but you're going to need to convert everything from freedom units to metric, and then everything's backwards in the UK from America. So, no, I'm kidding. The key concepts, yes, the key concepts that we talk about on the show apply anywhere that you fish and for any species, really. Because obviously your things like insect hatches are going to be different. I don't know what the stonefly hatches look like over in the UK. My guess is it's probably not as prolific as it is here in the Rocky Mountains where I live, because I don't know that you have the really fast, highly oxygenated tumbling rivers like we do here. I could be completely wrong. I don't know. I've never fished over in the UK. I know the mayfly hatches are things of legend over in the UK, and I definitely want to get over there and experience those at some point. So that's what's really going to differ, okay, based on where you're fishing. And if you're fishing in salt water, you don't care about caddisflies. Caddisflies don't apply to you if you're fishing for tarpon. But the key concepts that we talk about, which we can boil it all down to put flies in front of fish and make them look real, those key concepts apply everywhere, because that's what you're trying to do with your flies and your fly rod. Is you're trying to put those in front of a fish and make them look like something that fish is going to want to eat. But even the basics of matching the hatch apply anywhere outside of salt water, really, because we talk about the right fly formula, where you should pick a fly in your box based on the size, shape, and color of the real fly that you're trying to imitate. And that's in order, right? Size is most important, shape is next most, and color is least important. So wherever you're fishing, whether it's the UK, Southern United States, here in the Rockies, or if you're chasing bass or panfish or trout, the idea of closely imitating real food sources and using that right fly formula to do it applies. So the bottom line, whether it's trout, grayling, bass, panfish, just about all these key concepts that we discuss on the show are going to apply. Now, do you really need to dial in your fly selection for panfish? Not really, because a lot of the times they'll go for just about anything, especially the bluegill in my neck of the woods. But bass, trout, grayling, yeah, sometimes you really got to dial that in and figure out something that looks real, that imitates a food source, or might even just make them mad, something that's flashy and grabs their attention. But the concepts of getting a good drift, getting a presentation that looks real, that's not going to immediately make the fish think, oh, yeah, that's just that Durant guy trying to catch me again. Yeah, not today, buddy. Okay, being able to get the fish to not have that reaction to you, that, again, is going to apply no matter where or what you're fishing for. So very good question, Peter. Thank you so much for sending it in. Joe from Colorado has our next question, writes in and says, when preparing for a trip, how do you figure out what the regulations are, as well as what parts of the water do said regulations apply to, or if it's the entire water body / river? Is there a website or a specific place or agency that one could get into contact with? Love your show. Look forward to it every week. Thanks, Spencer and Ventures Fly Co. for everything you guys do. Joe, thank you. Appreciate the kind words, my friend. And it's a good question. So you're going to need some reading glasses, a comfortable armchair, and a boatload of caffeine to dissect the fishing regulations, because they can get absolutely Byzantine. No, they're usually not that bad. The worst has been, in my experience, was Montana's, because there's just a lot of water and a lot of regulations, and it can get really confusing. But even then, if you just don't try to read them at 9 or 10 at night after you've driven 10 hours to get there, they make a little bit more sense. So your best bet for figuring out regulations and whatnot, is going to be the latest version of any state's fishing proclamation, or they might call it the fishing guidebook. Those are the two most common names that if they fall under. But that's where all of your rules and regulations are going to be that tells you, yep, you can fish this section of river and you can use these kinds of flies. All that information is going to be in there. And you can find them all online. And since most of them, I haven't run into any that aren't available as a PDF yet. Even Wyoming's is a PDF. So if ours is a PDF, I think every state's will be, because we're famously a little low tech here in the Cowboy State. You can actually just, Control F and search the document for the specific river you want to fish to see if it's got any special regulations on it. But what a lot of states will do is they'll actually group their fisheries into regions, and then certain regions will have all the same regulations. Okay, for example, here in Wyoming, in Area 1, you're allowed to keep 6 total trout from rivers and lakes, but only 3 of those can be kept from a river, and only 1 of those river fish can be more than 16 inches long. There's also an entire group of streams in Area 1 that are closed from December 31st to July 31st for fishing. So you can't fish them for, 8 months out of the year? No, that's not right. I can't do math. 7 months out of the year. There we go. Don't ever count on me to do math, ever. You will be sorely disappointed. So you'll find regulations like that, where everything within an area or a region is going to have certain rules that you've got to follow. And then there might be even a few more based on the river you're fishing. And that's when you really want to make sure you read and look for the actual river, read through that area, see if the river that you're going to fish or the lake that you're going to fish has any additional regulations on it. Because the fishing regulations have to clearly spell out if there's certain restrictions for certain sections of the water. Okay. There's one river in Utah, for example. We'll call it the Big River. And the Big River is closed from its confluence with Coyote Creek all the way upstream from May 15th to the second Saturday in July to protect spawning cutthroat. And that confluence of the Big River and Coyote Creek is very easy to see. You can see it on Google Maps. It's very easy to pick out. It's all very clearly labeled. And then it's very easy to see when you're actually there on the river. I think they even have a sign for it now to make it very clear where that boundary is. Downstream of that, you can fish it all year, but May 15th to the second Saturday in July, you can't fish above that confluence of the Big River and Coyote Creek because the cutthroat are up there spawning. We leave them alone when they're doing that. So if you're heading out to fish in a place you're not very familiar with, you don't know the local terminology, a lot of times it'll be bridges or highways will be used as demarcation lines on a lot of places. And the guidebook isn't completely clear because they're not always the easiest thing to understand. Definitely stop in and ask at a fly shop for some help because a lot of the times they'll have very clear instructions for you. One of the fly shops near me, actually, they even have a free laminated card they give out that shows all of the closures and regulations for one of our local rivers. It's really helpful, and that's been pretty common to find in my experience. A lot of shops will have something like that because they've got a vested interest in keeping the rivers in good shape as well and following the regulations. So hopefully that helps, and good luck deciphering the regs wherever it is you end up fishing. Bridger from Montana has our next question, writes in and says, I was recently fishing on one of the local lakes up here in Montana when I snapped my fly rod. I was wondering if it is worthwhile to buy a repair kit and fix it, or should I just buy a new one? Will repairing it affect how well it casts? Bridger, good question, and sorry about the rod, man. That sucks. I have been there, especially, so for those who don't know, I review fly rods for a few different magazines and whatnot. I've been doing that for a long time. It's really fun. I get to fish a lot of different fly rods and play with new stuff, and I'm kind of a gear nut, so it just makes that obsession worse, honestly. But anyways, I've broken a couple of loaner rods that companies sent me to review. And that's the worst feeling, is when you have to call them and say, hey, yeah, Hank, I broke your rod that you sent me. Yep, snap the tip. And then you're worried that they're never going to send you a rod to play with again. So I understand. I've been there, and I've broken a couple of my own rods, and it's just not a good feeling. It's very frustrating. My rule of thumb, and this is coming from someone, I do build bamboo fly rods, and I've also repaired and built a few graphite fly rods in my day as well. If you break the first couple inches or so, just the very, very tip end of the rod, if you break that off, you can generally just stick a new tip-top guide on, rewrap it with some thread and some epoxy, and the rod will be fine at that point. In fact, I've got an old Winston from the mid 80s, an 8-foot 5-weight. My wife actually got it for me for her birthday, and the tip is broken, and it's like an inch short. So it's like a 7-foot 11-inch rod, a 7-8 footer, and it casts fine. So the repair job wasn't the best looking, but it still casts fine, and that's really all that matters. Is it casts and it acts just like that. But if you break the rod anywhere else than the very tip of it, those repair kits aren't going to be worth buying. I've seen the sleeves that you can put on broken sections. The problem is when the graphite breaks, that crack's just going to keep going. It's a lot like wood, where the crack's just going to keep going up and up the blank eventually, and eventually the whole thing's going to break. So those repair kits are really just useless for anything other than the very tip of the rod. So if you break it anywhere else than that, or you break like halfway down the tip, just send it in for repair. Let the manufacturer do the warranty work on it if it's under warranty. If not, go pop on a new rod. If you bought a rod that's a big box store brand, like a Cabela's rod, for example, they might not have warranty repair. They might just give you a new rod at a discount, or they might even give it to you as a straight up trade. Just depends on the store and their policies. But if you're buying a rod from any of the major rod builders, you're going to get warranty service. Redington, Echo all have warranty service, and you can get rods for very budget-friendly prices there. But we even warranty our rods here at VFC. That's very important to us because we understand that, hey, breaking rods is no fun. So we'll repair rods for you as well. And we also send our rods out with 2 tip sections. So if you break the tip, you can keep fishing the rod, and then you can just get a new tip section from us if you need to. So hopefully that helps. It sucks again that you broke your rod. I'm sorry, but hopefully that helps. Leo from Arkansas has our next question, writes in and says, I was wanting to know what the difference is between jig nymphs and regular nymphs with bead heads. I usually just fish on an indicator setup and have heard mixed reviews about which is better on this setup. Leo, that's a great question. So jigged nymphs are exactly what they sound like. They are just nymphs that are tied on jig hooks. So they ride in the water like a traditional jig will, with the hook point up instead of pointing down. Now, something that you'll hear a lot about the jig nymphs is that they should get snagged less often on the bottom since they're riding hook point up instead of hook point down in the water. I don't know if that's entirely true. It's really hard to quantify, but it makes sense when you think about it. And it's something that, in my experience, I have fished a lot of jig nymphs lately, and I think it holds true, just in my own experience. And then your regular nymphs, they're just going to drift through the water hook point down. And since that's the way that nymphs have been fished for literally decades until the big interest in jig nymphs and Euro nymphs lately, those are still very effective. So there's nothing wrong with a traditional regular beadhead nymph at all. They still work very well. I think jig nymphs are really great for some patterns, like your soft hackle pheasant tails, your guide's choice hare's ears. I really like them for prince nymphs too, because any nymph that's got some sort of CDC collar or some sort of hackle on it, that jig is going to give those flies just a little bit more action, just by the nature of the jig itself, right? The jigs are meant to bounce and move through the water column, kind of imitate the real movements of little fish and little bugs and whatnot. And I think it looks an awful lot like the real flies as they're starting to go from their nymph stage to that emerger stage and shoot up to the surface to become adults. I really think there's something to be said for just how powerful that jigged action can actually be with these flies sometimes. As far as what's better on an indicator rig, they're both going to be fine. Alex and I fish jig nymphs on our indicator rigs all the time. And they're great. They float well underneath those indicators. I've not run into any sort of experience and certainly no evidence at all that makes me think, oh, I shouldn't have used jig nymphs with an indicator. They've caught on with the Euro nymphing and the tight line nymphing crew because they sink very quickly, but that's not the only place to use them. They're not, quote unquote, better for that. They're just a different take on our classic nymphs. So thanks for sending the question on in. Jack from New Jersey has our next question, writes in and says, I am new to fly fishing and have been following the podcast. I often hear you talk about running a multiple fly rig. Should I be doing this? As of now, I have only either used a single dry fly or single nymph. I've had some good days and plenty of bad ones. Should I try a multi-fly rig or continue to fine-tune the basics? Jack, 100%. Multi-fly rigs, you should be using them in the right situations, but you should 100% be using them. They're very effective, and I don't think they don't require more than just the basics. I wouldn't consider them a step up. I would consider them very entry level. When I was guiding, I was teaching folks to fish with either a dry dropper or a double nymph rig. It was very, very rare that I would get into a situation where I would only tie one fly on for a lot of my clients. Now, if there was a big cicada hatch or if we were fishing hoppers, yeah, that would make sense. But a lot of the times there were two flies on the rig. Single dry flies are a really good choice during hatches, but if the fish aren't actively rising, that dry dropper rig or that double nymph rig's going to double your chances of catching a fish because you've got two flies out there instead of one. And again, honestly, the only time that I fish a single fly is if I'm in a really, truly amazing hatch. And even then, I've usually got some sort of emerger or dropper off of that dry fly because not every fish is looking up to eat the dry fly. Sometimes they want that emerger, or they want that cripple, or they want, whatever it is. So going with two flies gives you a better chance of catching some fish. It's just a very effective way to cover water. And then again, I wouldn't look at fishing two fly rigs as an advanced step. It really is pretty standard way to fish, at least here in America. I know that, and I think, I've actually been thinking about this a lot lately. I think the best anglers in the world are probably the Europeans. And this is the flip side of my argument. I'm saying, hey, use two flies. It's great. You can catch more fish. But the flip side is the Canadians and the Europeans who live in countries and provinces that are only allowed to fish with one fly, I think they might be the best anglers in the world. Because a lot of times they can only fish with one fly. And I know in some places they can't even use split shot. Or foam or plastic indicators. It is one fly, and that's all they can use. So these anglers have to figure out how to dial in presentation with one fly and how to put that fly in front of as many fish as possible. And I think if you can successfully catch a lot of fish with just one fly and no extra weight or anything like that, you're arguably a better angler than someone who's using two flies. But that's kind of subjective because then we got to get into, well, how do we define better angler? It's certainly a different skill set, though, and one that I don't necessarily know if a lot of us here in the States develop because we're so used to fishing with two flies. So the flip side of it is you could just fish the one fly and really dial that in, but I fish how you're comfortable. I'm not ever going to tell you how to fish. I'm just going to say that I recommend the multi-fly rig because it's a very effective way to fish and it gives you a lot more feedback. very quickly because you've got two chances of catching fish. Let's just look at the double nymph rig, for example. Okay. You've got two nymphs down there, and the bottom nymph can tell you if you're in the strike zone, because if it's ticking along the bottom and you're catching bottom every now and then, you're right in the strike zone. You're right where the fish are likely feeding. And then that top nymph, again, is another option for the fish to go ahead and eat. And if you're not getting any bites on either of those, that's feedback. Okay, you're in the right area, but maybe you've got the wrong flies on, or maybe there's drag on them. Okay, there's some kind of feedback loop there going. Whereas with the one fly, it's just not as much information coming back to you. Okay, dry dropper, same situation. They may not be eating the dry flies, but if you're catching a bunch on the nymph, hey, you know that they're at least eating this nymph. You could switch your dry fly to match the adult version of that nymph if you wanted to, or you can just keep the rig and just keep fishing the nymph because maybe it's just at the right depth and they're liking it for that reason. So the feedback loop that you get from two flies, I like that because it confirms what you're doing right, or it gives you information about what you're doing incorrectly and how to fix it. So I do like that feedback loop, especially for beginners from fishing two flies. I think it helps you figure out the presentation and the drift and picking apart water. I really think it can help you do that. But again, the flip side of it is, if you can do that all with one fly too, and if you can get enough and you can start catching a lot of fish, arguably you could be a better, more effective angler that way. So it really comes down to personal preference, but I would strongly recommend at least trying the multi-fly rig because you never know if you're going to like it till you try it. So again, it's not an advanced thing. I would go ahead and give it a shot, but hopefully that helps. Thank you. Ivan from Pennsylvania has our next question, writes in and says, recently we had a lot of rain in my area, and when I showed up to the river a couple of days after the rain, the water was still very, very muddy. What should I do in this situation? What fly size should I use? Should I downsize my flies because maybe trout get more picky from an abundance of food? Or should I go with a larger fly size so that trout can see it better? Maybe I should use attractor patterns or streamers. What would you suggest? Thanks in advance. Ivan, good question. Thank you. It really all depends on how, and I know I say that all the time. Well, it depends. I feel like we need that on a shirt with the Untangled logo. Untangled. Well, it depends. Anyways, it really does depend on how high and muddy the rivers are after that rain. Because after some rains, some rivers can just become completely unfishable. The rule of thumb here is if there's a lot of debris in the river, like logs and tree branches and cars and whatever else you want to throw in there, right? It might just be better to wait for all that debris to clear up and let the water drop into shape a little bit before you start fishing it. If the water looks more like mud than water, I would probably just say, go home, watch some football. We're about to football season anyways. Watch some football and have a nice relaxing afternoon. But if it's just a little bit off color, if it's just a little bit darker, maybe it's a little bit higher and faster, what I like to do in those situations is I go with a little bit bigger flies, have some flash and some movement. Because even in muddy water, fish are still going to eat. They're not going to just stop eating because the water is muddy. They still need to eat food or else they'll die. They can still see your bugs and other food items in that kind of muddy water. Their eyesight's really great. But they also use their other senses too, where they can feel things. So the movement and the noise that a fly makes in the water can really help attract fish to them. Even if they can't directly see it, they can sometimes feel that fly moving through the water if there's a lot of noise and movement with it. So a San Juan worm or any other worm pattern is fantastic to use after rain because a lot of that rainwater is going to push worms into the river and the fish are just going to gobble them up. Because, have you ever met a trout that does not like worms? No, they all love them. Okay. So throw a San Juan worm on or any other worm pattern after the rain. That's a great option. It really is a go-to for me, especially if the water is just a little bit off color. I'll tie that on. Another option is you can throw a streamer out there. They can be a great choice in high water because they've got all that movement and that flash that really pushes a lot of water, that makes that noise that attracts fish over to them. So you can fish streamers like just on a normal retrieve where you're swinging them and stripping them through the water, or you can even just dead drift them under an indicator. Sometimes that's enough. They'll just bounce and move with the water. In fact, a few years ago, I was out fishing this little stream that was on the downside of runoff, but it was still high and it was still pretty murky. I wouldn't call it muddy, but normally it's crystal clear, and you could not see more than an inch into the water, and it was moving at a pretty good clip. And I'd been fishing it all day, and I'd caught a few fish, but I knew there were some big ones in there somewhere. So I ended up tying on a big streamer underneath an indicator, and I just lobbed it out there, and I was just dead drifting that streamer under the indicator. And I come up around the corner, and I see this beautiful hole, this nice deep pool, and I drop this streamer under an indicator right on that seam, and I just let it drift. And then my indicator stops moving, so I yank on it, right? And it feels like it's stuck into a log or into a rock. And then the log jumped, and it was a huge cutthroat. Long story short, I ended up landing it. It was a 26-inch cutthroat trout, one of my biggest cutthroat I've ever caught. Beautiful, amazing fish. Took me for an absolute ride. It was so much fun. But I caught that in muddy water on a streamer dead drifted under an indicator. So don't overlook how good it can be sometimes to fish that muddy water. Sometimes that little bit of cover and all the extra junk in the water can get the big fish ready to move around. So that does it for our questions this week, folks. Thank you all so much for sending those in, and thank you for listening to the entire show this week. Listen to the end, really helps us out more than you can know. And if you want to help us out even more, you can go ahead and rate and review the show. Make sure you subscribe to it as well, wherever you're listening to it, because the more ratings and subscriptions we get, the more folks we can help live real life. And like I said at the beginning of the show, that's our goal here at VFC. That's what we want to do. We want y'all to have an amazing time out there on the water. We want to help you achieve all those fly fishing goals that you've got. So until next week, everybody, get out on the water, enjoy yourselves, go catch some fish, and live real life.